right, folks. Today is the 12th of December, 2024. My name is Evan Strong, the founder of InTheImageClothingCompany. I'm going to put my sleeve cuffs back down. A clothing company that is so much more than just a clothing company. We are called In the Image because we are all universally designed in the image of our living God, who is Jesus Christ. So, In the Image Clothing Company. We discuss the human body, but we come at it from the skeletal system. Because all the musculature does is just rotate and pivot and hinge the skeletal system. So as long as the skeletal system's allowed, keyword, to be in its natural position, then the rest of the body will just do its thing. Okay, so here's the thing. Two prerequisites that I've had since before I founded this company as it is now, just to allow the body to have a chance to operate natural, and then we get into depth from there discussing things. First prerequisite being to lace your shoes with our technique. It's just the technique that we use. Included with that is to tie your shoes evenly over toward the inside, and all that will do, opposed to any other technique that you could lace your shoes with, is just allow your feet to be unaltered. Unless the shoe itself doesn't accommodate for your foot, like a heel on it or unnatural shape of the inside where the insole sits, or stretch within the shoe, but that allows the shape to be like your foot as far as the upper goes. And then second prerequisite being to remove all the tags from everything that you wear. Tags are synthetic almost always nowadays, and even if they're not, they're still causing an unnatural gap. Wherever they're placed, it's within clothing and it's changing the way that the body just stands and moves, and it has to accommodate for that little gap that's within side of the clothing, only where the tag is. And that includes within the tongues of the shoes. I know those are hard to remove. I know that from personal experience. Sometimes I'll just take some scissors and put some slits in the tag. The point is, we don't want it to be slippery right against the ankle. So those are the two prerequisites, just to allow the body to have a chance to operate natural. Because the point is, our bodies are designed to work. They would just work. Unless there was a reason that they couldn't, there'd be no reason that they wouldn't. And those reasons could be anything. But unless there is something, we shouldn't feel like we have to always be in this constant chronic pain, because we don't have to. So we address those things and get down to the actual truth and the real reasons as to why we're experiencing what we are. We as human beings are universally designed. It doesn't matter if you're a man or a woman. It doesn't matter if you're tall or short or skinny or fat or what age you are. It's about the skeletal system's ability to just move. And it only does that in the position it's designed to, because the bones only connect how they do. So clothing is the only thing placed physically on us, always. It's the only thing that has that high of potential to alter our bodies. If it's imbalanced or if it's unnatural, if there's stretch within our clothing, that's extremely not good for the body to have any kind of stretch within anything we place on it. So ideally our clothing is 100% natural materials, and clothing needs to sit where the pants are entirely above the hips, just to allow them to open and move and have room to do what they do. There's a lot going on in the hip sockets. And then slightly higher in the front than the rear to keep that core activated. Your core has to contract, meaning the muscles have to come together in order to activate and be strong. And if the pant waistline is lower, there's no way you're going to fight that, or I, or anybody. So the pants have to be slightly higher in the front than the rear. And then for the tops, the seams on the tops of your shoulder need to sit behind that little bone that is actually the other end of your collarbone. And so that's just going to allow your shoulders to open up and be in their natural neutral positions, and then ideally just right at the very edges for those edge seams. Now, what this video is talking about how clothing affects joint extensions. I mentioned how we should not have to stretch. I, being the founder of In The Image Clothing Company, haven't stretched in, I'm not just throwing out a number, it's probably been around 8 months or more. I don't need to, because my body isn't having anything causing it to not be allowed to work. Because of what I know within clothing and within what we talk about within life, the other thing besides clothing that we focus on the most is the radius within our hands. This rounding to our hands and our feet have a similar gripped arch as the way the hand works. And we live in a modern man-made world where everything is so unnaturally flat. So if we're allowing our hands to have that radius and hold things with some texture and some rounding to them, and allowing clothing to sit correct, we should never have to stretch. I know that's bold, but it is true. It really is. We discuss it to the point where you can understand it. You just have to see it. So the body has ranges of motion. Normally when we're trying to stretch things, a lot of times it's the hinge joints. It's within the body, there's different things. There's a hinge, a very simple hinge, like the elbow. It pretty much only does this, just up and down, simple hinge. Because even if I'm out here, it's doing the same thing, just a simple hinge. The knees are very similar. They do have a little bit of rotation toward the end of the range of motion, but the knee just hinges, and it just does it, simple and straight, very similar to the elbow. Now, the body just has ranges of motion. A range of motion would be like this, from all the way extended to all the way closed. You're not really gonna get farther because your bones, like if I put my finger in my elbow's crease, the bones will just hit. They can't go any farther. And the hand can't really go any farther either because it's going to hit it's gonna hit the deltoid, this muscle on the shoulder. The body just has its ranges of motion, and it has no more than that. So when people are trying to stretch, all you're doing, you meaning anybody, any human being, is trying to stretch into the ranges of motion the body already has. And we shouldn't have to do that, because if they're already there, then that's what we have available, unless something's altering the way that that's allowed to work. So if your pants are sitting anywhere besides how I discussed, your hips will just be affected. And if your hips are affected, they're the center of your entire being. Top to bottom, you hinge at the hips, your top comes down, or your feet come up, right at your hips. And if the waistline of your pants, like I said, is just not in a good position to allow your pelvis to just be neutral with the rest of your body, your pelvis is your hips, right? That there's a big, so your pelvis is this whole area here, okay? If that's altered at all, it's going to travel through the rest of your body because everything has to compensate. If there's anything within the body that's not working correct, then something else and many things have to compensate, because we have to continue to stand or just sit vertical, or at the very least breathe. That's what human life really is breath, and that takes your whole body to do in some form. So we need to really be able to allow all the ranges of motion to be there, and all we have to do for that to happen is just do everything we can to not restrict the body's natural workings. So when it comes to the elbow, a lot of people can't actually fully extend their elbows, and especially that right side. Now there's a lot going on there. If you can't fully extend your elbow, if you keep your feet straight and even, and your hips straight and even, and your shoulders in a good position, you might be in a pretty chronic patterning, so try to actually get everything straight and even, and look down, and hips over the feet, shoulders even, and at a height where your traps are actually activating, and try to fully extend both of your arms from a good position. And chances are that right arm is going to have a lot harder time extending, as long as you're right hand dominant. And even if not, clothing is, in a sense, and so the patternings people will still get into even if they're left hand dominant. So what's happening there is, I have a video titled How Clothing Affects the Forearms, and I mention how the muscles of the forearms, if the hand is altered from using things that are flat, that's not allowing that open palm that then travels to an open shoulder, because the hand really is essentially the shoulder. If the hand's altered, then it's going to alter the way that all the muscles that go into the hand to work the fingers and thumb and rotations, it's going to alter the way that they work. And so what'll happen is they can adhere to that bone that's on the side of your arm here, and then it's all tensed up and your wrist is out of its neutral position, and then it's very hard for people to fully extend their right arm, because in order to, that wrist needs to be neutral, and now you can extend. When the hand's cocked back, which is the most commonly, well, that's just very common nowadays. There's a lot of reasons as to why. I've touched on a lot of them within In the Image Clothing Company videos. If that hand gets cocked back like this, these muscles out here have shortened, and now you can't fully extend your arm. But that's not the only thing that's happening there, because now if your arm can't extend, then something has to compensate. And so now your hips are going to twist, because if you can't extend your arm, but you still need to get it to the range of motion that it would have being fully extended, then to get there, you're going to take parts of your body to help you that aren't really supposed to be doing that motion. So full extension of every joint is very important to have for the health of the joint, like I said, for the health of the rest of the body, because if not, then other things will be doing things that are unnormal for them as well. Unnatural compensation. So when it comes to just the elbow, yes, the hand needs to be working to the best of our own hand situation, how we can get it to the most natural. Open palm with that radius. And then, well, that also is very important to have fingernails. I discuss that all the time. Toenails and fingernails all the way to the end of your finger or toe to support it fully. That's just what they're for, is to support. So that will really alter the forearm and shoulder as well. And then if the forearm, hand, or shoulder get altered, the elbow's extension gets altered, okay? Like trying to extend your elbow with your shoulder in a position that's unnatural, very hard. Putting your elbow in a natural position, well, I didn't try to really extend my elbow, and I said elbow, I meant shoulder in a natural position. My elbow just kind of extended because that's just how the body works. So, things like sleeve cuffs. I have a video titled How Sleeve Cuffs Affect Body Mechanics for In the Image Clothing Company. And if your sleeve cuff is on your hand because your shirt's a little bit oversized for you, then your hand's actually going to be in a similar position as that cocked back wrist position that I was showing, trying to hold your sleeve cuff up, and that will just bend your forearm and change your shoulder and change the angle of your neutral wrist. So now if you live life with a lot of time spent like this, then your elbow is getting used to never fully straightening, because if you straighten it, then your hand gets closed off by your sleeve cuff if it's too long. So it's very important for clothing to fit. We are a clothing company for the sake of the human body. Clothing has to fit. Whatever you can do about it, okay? I'm not ever trying to tell people to spend more money, ever, never. That's not what I mean, but it does have to fit for your body's function. So, when we think about the hip flexors, I did a video, it was actually quite a while back, titled Naturally Functioning Hip Flexors. And it's the same thing with the pant waistline. If your pants are sitting in the correct position where I discussed they need to be, then you can just fully extend, because the position I'm in right now is actually like fully extended. I wasn't trying to do that, I just was there. Because if we can have our hip flexors fully elongated, fully extended, if we can be able to get to that place, then we're just stacked neutral. But if you can't get your hip flexors to fully come forward and like extend in the front, then you're going to have your weight a little bit behind you if your hips are bent, and now muscles are just having to overwork to try to keep you vertical, because your center of gravity is just a little bit behind yourself, behind your feet. So extension of those hip flexors is very important, and then you're just stacked over yourself. Then you just have ranges of motion without compensation. So you need to be able to extend, and it's going to come from the clothing, no matter what. That's the thing, is us being what we are, we don't have an opinion on this could help you or this does, but it's kind of something you can choose from. No, clothing is the solution. People just don't see what's happening, just as I didn't until I learned what I started to learn, and then I founded this company, InTheImageClothingCompany. Now, the knees won't ever be able to fully extend if the hips can't, because if the hips are always bent, your knees have to be just to compensate to keep you vertical. Now, if I were to straighten my knees but keep my hips at this level of bend, I'd do this. And now I have such tension on my my hamstrings because my hip flexors have a bend. And your hip flexors need to work with your hamstrings to keep you straight. So all that tension that people are feeling within their hamstrings, just one thing alone that could come from is your pant waistline, because now they're just being pulled on. Your hamstrings connect from back here behind your leg, right around where your knee is in the rear. They don't necessarily connect right in the rear, but right next to your knee, and then up to your pelvis up here. So if your pelvis is tilted because your hip flexors can't extend, then it's just stretching out your hamstrings. So now you're living with constant pull in that case on your hamstrings, going around like this just because of your pant waistline alone. So the knees need to be able to fully extend, but since the body works as a whole, the only way that's allowed to happen is if you're doing what I'm doing now. I wasn't doing that intentional for the sake of the demonstration. Your hip flexors need to extend so your knees can extend. Otherwise, your knees can't. Now, when we talk about the feet, our shoelacing technique, it allows room for those open arches. And it doesn't alter your feet at all. If you lace your shoes with our technique, as long as the tags are removed as well, if you're like sitting on something where your legs are dangling and you've got your shoes on, it'll feel like there's no pull on your ankles or your feet. That's why we have that technique. That's why it's one of our 2 prerequisites. It doesn't alter your feet at all. And I sleep in my shoes a lot. I also wear barefoot shoes, so they're so minimal. But yeah, it doesn't alter your feet. But if your feet or ankles are altered at all, then your knees can't extend. Same thing, because your feet are your foundation, and if they're altered, then something else up the chain of gravity is going to have to compensate, and it's going to get sore and be just in an unnatural position and not being able to fully extend. So when we stand, we want to be able to get fully extended, and that position just needs to be able to happen. We don't want to be standing with our knees actually like fully extended. We should have a slight bend to have activation within the muscle. But you should be able to get, like if I'm just standing with just a slight bend in my knees and just throughout my body to stay activated, from this position, if I were to fully extend my knees, I shouldn't have to adjust anything. There, I fully extended my knees. The point is, your feet need to be already in their neutral position. The ankles need to be in their neutral position for your knees to extend. Because if people are stretching their quads all the time, like grabbing their foot and pulling it back and trying to stretch their quads, that should never happen. Never. I've mentioned a lot how the quads actually should be doing very, very little in a naturally functioning body. The body is working as a whole in that case, and they're just working with everything else. But not only that, the quad really doesn't do that much naturally. It's more of like a stabilizer. When you're stepping up onto things and squatting down or sitting down, it really is the rear of your body that should be doing that when the body's in its natural working position. So when you're stretching your quads to try to get your hip flexors extended, it really is because of your pant waistline, and your quads are just taking over because, like I'm saying, the things that aren't allowed to work, something has to compensate for them, and so it will be the quad, the front of the legs, those muscles within there. Right? The thighs, if you will, if you don't know the word quadriceps is these muscles. So that's what's happening. When you feel tightness within the body, it's almost never that thing that you need to address. It's that thing is compensating for something else not being able to do its job. Because when the body's not allowed to work as a whole, then things are just trying to make up for the lack of functionality in the things that are being inhibited. Now, if you have tags within the tongues of your shoes, when your feet come upward, that's called dorsiflexion. When they point, it's called plantar flexion, and when they come up, it's called dorsiflexion. So if you were like coming up to a staircase, you're going to step up it and lift your toes to get over the next step, and then lift your toes and lift your toes. When you're doing that, if there's that slippery tag on the tongue of your shoe, your body's not going to be able to lift the foot and get the ankle to dorsiflex, because all the muscles that are on the front of that ankle that's allowing it to dorsiflex, like if this is my shin bone, this is the top of my foot, there's a tag slippery right here and it needs to flex. And if it's really slippery and the body can't predict it and it doesn't feel stable, it's just not going to flex. The ankle won't come upward, the toes can't lift. And in that case, if your ankles can't dorsiflex, ideally they should be able to just come up without compensation. That's what I'm doing right now. I'm doing with my hands what I'm doing with my feet. And my body's not compensating. I'm going back and forth a little bit, but that's not a compensation. I'm doing it now just standing still. What I mean is, if your ankles can't dorsiflex because of that tag, your pelvis will then move to try to just get your knee up like over the step, for that example, because your foot should be able to be doing the range of motion. But if your foot's range of motion, ankle's range of motion, right, where that tag is limited, then your pelvis, this is like, if this is my shin, top of my foot, my knee, and my pelvis, okay, it's funny because that really does correlate with down there. Foot, ankle, hip, or foot, ankle, shin, knee, thigh, pelvis. That's funny, huh? That's how the body works. This is my arm, but it's also essentially my leg. The human body is so simple if we look at it as it is. So if that ankle is not able to flex to get up over the step, the hip will then, I was doing it already, the hip will take over, right? This can move, but if it can't, this will to bend the knee in a sense to get the foot up. So the ankle's not really moving upward much, but things are moving out of the way to get your foot over something. See all the compensation rather than just lifting the foot, and there you go. So there's your calves, right? That's what I'm talking about. The tags in the front of on the tops of your feet, on the front of your ankle, that tag is what's going to affect your calves on the rear. Because people are getting chronically tight calves, but if their ankle mobility is just so restricted, then their calf has to do things it wouldn't normally do in those situations that the ankle would normally dorsiflex. So, but then also the hips, like I was saying, they're the things that are compensating as well. So when it comes to full ranges of motion within the body, it's nothing to stretch into. They're already there. They just need to be allowed to be there. And just the things I've mentioned so far are so much inhibiting the body's natural ranges of motion. So those are really the big ones. There are things we could talk about within the rest of the body, but as long as clothing is sitting correct and shoes are laced and tied correct to where the feet and ankles position aren't altered, and all the tags are removed, I mean, those are our things. That's our 2 prerequisites, and then just discussing where clothing sits. That's really it, and the body will just work. Keeping things off of the wrists though, because the range of motion in your wrist will change. Not only what this can do to the shoulder and then the elbow bend, like I was showing, restricting that extension, but also the mobility within your wrist will just change because it's being closed off if there's a cuff from your sleeve sitting on it. And I think I mentioned the video, yes, I did, of sleeve cuffs. But then also I have a video titled How Pant Cuffs Affect Body Mechanics for In The Image Clothing Company. And that'll do a similar thing to what the tag in the shoe is doing, in the sense of restricting the dorsiflexion of your ankle, just because there's something sitting on top of it, just like the wrists. If there's cuffs sitting on your wrists, then your wrists can't be natural. I could get into it, but that's not needed for this video. So there's only a few things like that you need to address, and then your body just has its ranges of motion, because it already does. They're just being restricted. That's it. So yeah, ranges of motion within the body, it's something that I had a lot of misconceptions about. I would go to work. I remember years ago, I'd go work an 8 or 9 hour shift and come home, and I'd put like the top of my foot up on a recliner and my knee on the ground, and like be sitting in a lunge and like trying to stretch my hip flexor and my quads, and trying to really just get into ranges of motion that I thought I needed to train into or stretch into. But I'm the same person, and it's just a few years later, and I don't do exercises, I don't do workouts, I don't stretch ever, and my body has never worked as good as it does now, meaning as natural as it does, just because there's no need to do anything to it if it's allowed to do what it's designed to. That's for every single human. We have our individual situations and our own individual bodies, but this is true for everybody. It really is. Okay, so that is how clothing is affecting joint extension, ranges of motion within the body. So like I said, today is the 12th of December 2024. My name is Evan Strong, the founder of In The Image Clothing Company. We have 3 ways of approaching, that's kind of 4 if you're counting my thumbs, 3 ways, and that's 6, but we have 3 ways of approaching In The Image Clothing Company. We have In The Image Clothing Company podcast, where we have discussions on the gospel of Jesus Christ. That is what our entire everything here is centered on and around, because he created everything and all and us and the ability to even do this. So that is a great place that I would recommend you going to if you'd like to. In The Image Clothing Company podcast. I love it. And then we also have In The Image Clothing Company music, where it's starting to take off a little bit. And you'll see if you want to go there and check it out. What I mean by that, it's going to be really fun. Each time that I mention In The Image Clothing Company music, that's the phrase that comes out. It's going to be really fun. So we will have clothing available eventually for the body, allowing the body to work, staying centered, fitting, sitting where I discuss clothing needs to. If you purchase it ever, please just try your best to get it in your size. What I mean by that is just don't ever purchase In The Image Clothing Company clothing to fit oversized. Do not. The entire point of our company is to allow the body to work. So that's what our clothing will do. 100% natural materials. It's going to be great. Otherwise, I would not be making any clothing or selling clothing if it wasn't very intentional. That's the only reason that we're going to have it, okay? So, yeah, cool. Sweet, thank you. I mentioned at the beginning heels on the shoes, but if you have heels on your shoes, that just creates a whole slew of problems. We could talk about each and everything that it does to every single part of the body up to the top of your head and the tips of your fingers. But don't put heels on your shoes. Your feet need to be flat on the ground as if you weren't wearing anything. They need to. They have to. I'm not telling you something. That's the way the human body works. Same height on the toes as the heels. Flat. Okay? Alright. And then, as well as that, this should be mentioned within this video. When you lace your shoes, stop at your ankle. At the right, like again, if this was my top of my foot, this is my shin bone, and this is my ankle here in the angle. Stop your lacing right at the ankle, right where it will flex. If you go up higher, you're restricting, like I was saying with the tag and the pant cuffs, the range of motion of your ankle, and then you're going to have major compensation, because as much as a synthetic tag will cause compensation, having a rope tied around your ankle that's going to cause an even greater extent of compensation. It will. Up through your entire body, to the top of, like I'm saying, your head or your fingertips, or however high you want to be able to get with your body from your feet. Okay, all right, thank you. Allow your body to just have its ranges, and it just will. There's a lot of things though that could cause rotation imbalances, and if you have a rotation imbalance, things will just stiffen up and then they won't be able to extend. So things like our video titled How Zippers Affect Body Mechanics for In The Image Clothing Company, How Drawstrings Affect Body Mechanics for In The Image Clothing Company, the dreaded collar seam. We have 3 videos up until today's date on that, full ones for In The Image Clothing Company. Those things will cause rotations within the body, and that will do a lot to the ability for things to extend, really just on one side in those cases. If you have a rotation, the elbow will bend and you can't extend it. If you have a rotation, the elbow will bend and you can't extend it. But then same with the pelvis is rotating, so then one knee is more bent than the other one. And yeah, you'll just have compensation in a twist if there's any rotation imbalances within your body from an external source. It's not about the human body when we're talking about anything that's causing a problem. It's just the external things placed onto it that it's having to work around. So that's why I say, and it will always be that way, we're not telling our bodies to do anything because we can't. They only do what they do. And I'm not telling you to do something with your body. It will always be the word allow. Our God created this vessel for us to go through this earth. Go on this earth, through this world, if you will, for the amount of time that we're going to be here. And it just needs to work to the best of what we, our own selves, can do to allow that to happen. So that's always the focus. Okay? All right. Thank you.